continuing to solve.
Yeah, so when you come to a place like this is like a kid in a candy store, isn't it? Coming here to this museum?
Well, I love this museum. I've been affiliated for over 20 years now, and there's always something new to discover when I'm here. It's just an incredible place. They have many fascinating things in their archives that I've used in my research, in addition to everything that's on display.
Yeah, and the past really is kind of a footprint to the future in a way, I guess, right?
It is. There's really a continuity of invention, and a lot of the ideas from earlier inventions are still very useful and come up again and again with new inventions.
Fascinating. Well, let's go inside.
Just beyond the museum's main doors, we find the Hall of Innovation, a celebration of human ingenuity. Here, we're looking at early technology that had a profound effect on our society.
So, Dr. Tenner, one of the things I find fascinating when you walk through here is how one invention can lead to another. I mean, we're looking right here. This looks like a piano, but it's not really.
The piano industry was one of the growing industries of the 19th century, and toward the end of the century, every middle-class family at least aspired to have a piano at home. So when people were thinking about mechanizing writing, a piano keyboard was a natural way to think about a keyboard, because people hadn't seen other kinds of keyboards before. And what I find most interesting about the typewriter, though, is how early typewriters were used and why they were adopted, because the early typewriter cost as much in real terms as a personal computer cost in the 1980s. And I discovered that they really didn't write much faster than a skilled penman could write. And the big reason for the success of the early typewriter was the growth of organizations and the inability of people in bureaucracies to read so many different kinds of handwriting. So the typewriter's big advantage was not in speed, but in standardization. And that's why so many typewriter fonts all look alike, because that was really deliberate. You did not want a very individualized font. You wanted something in an insurance company that everybody, from the clerk to the president, would be able to read with minimal difficulty. And the early fonts were so successful that a lot of them are still in use today.
Wow. Talk to us about this box, because somebody would look at that and say, what's that?
Well, this was a so-called macaroni box. This was used for shipping macaroni from Italy to the United States, and it was adapted in the 1880s as an ancestor of the adding machine and thus of the computer. And it's an interesting study to me, having grown up in Chicago, because Chicago was one of those cities that was an encyclopedia of industry. So you could start with something simple like this to demonstrate the concept. And then as you were developing it, there were all kinds of machinists and metal shops. There were all kinds of people who could help you develop your idea.
And that got me thinking, though you would never expect it just by looking at them. These two antiques combined gave us modern computers, smartphones, all the devices we use today. We decided to walk over to this futuristic art gallery to have a conversation about how these devices impact us today.
Talk to me about technology and the role it plays in our lives today. Too important? Important enough? Where are we?
One difference in the way technology works today and the way it formerly did is that we're much less likely to think of something as technological, quote unquote. We're more likely to naturalize it, to see it as part of everyday existence. So people might not necessarily be thinking about technology as they did in the 1920s, when everybody was really, really conscious of the machine, and people were writing symphonies, for example, for machine sounds. There was a concert circuit for the new electronic invention, the theremin. The 1920s actually were the peak of that kind of technophilia. Paradoxically, because technology has become so much more ubiquitous and successful, it is less readily visible and less easy to inspect as technology.
Conversely, technology has made the invisible visible. Let's check out one of these displays, an art installation that analyzes human emotion through social media. But how? It does it by processing over 23 million tweets a day from Twitter's trends, closely examining them for emotional insights. The results are then graphed and color-coded, turning this raw data into a real-time snapshot of global reaction to everything from news to cat pics to people's current moods. What this installation does is not too different from the tech we use on a daily basis. It gathers data to better understand our habits from the information we put online. But how accurately do our online personas reflect our real-life behaviors? After spending some time seeing how our peers across the world were feeling in real time, I started to wonder.
One of the things that I found interesting is that talking to the people here, that a lot of the emotions that they get are happiness, and so much of what we see on social media seems toxic or unhappy. Is that just our impression? Is that the stuff that registers with us, or?
Well, actually, that is the way in which the social media companies increase engagement. It isn't any accident that you're more likely to see the negative ones, because they have found that the negative ones get you more engaged than the happy ones. So that's right. So we see actually a distorted view of what's going on, and that's why this project is so interesting. We see that most of the time it's really much happier than it seems, but what is shown to us is not necessarily representative of the whole system.
Yeah, because it's a lot more cluttered than that.
The big problem of social media and of a lot of advanced technology is asymmetry. That is, these companies know so much more about how we use their products and so much more about our behaviors than we can ever find out through academic research. They will give academic researchers a shot at using some of their data, but mainly to reach the conclusions that they think are going to be most helpful to them. So because this is such a black box, it is especially hard to talk about policy in regulating these companies, because to regulate something we need to know how the business is really run, but the algorithm is secret.
Think of an algorithm as a set of rules. Companies like Facebook, Google, and Yahoo write these rules to determine what you see online and in turn what we know and even how we feel. And based on your behavior, the algorithms may adjust to show you more of one type of content over another, based on patterns from what you search, like, or share online. Companies say these algorithms improve the user experience, but critics say companies have too much control and may have crossed ethical lines.
Google says, well, if you told everybody our algorithm, they would game it. They would distort things even more than they do. And then because they're using machine learning, that is, because the software is following rules to discern patterns and to modify itself according to patterns, the weird thing is that the software developers themselves may not understand what's going on, and that they actually have no way of asking the software to say, "Hey, why are you doing this? What's happening here?" So it's a really strange situation that the more advanced the technology gets, the less we understand it.
Technology is so deeply embedded in our lives that we use it to express our emotions. But what are the unintended consequences we're living through today from these innovations? If we're to learn from the past, it's better to ask Dr. Tenner what history can teach us.
And you've been off to the races. I mean, you've written several books about these subjects.
Yes, it's been the wonderful thing about unintended consequences is that they keep coming, and they keep coming unexpectedly. And if there were ever any break, if there were no more unintended consequences, that would be the biggest unintended consequences of all, so I'd still have a chance to write about it.
Well, let's talk about some unintended consequences. In your TED Talk, you talk about the Titanic, but you also talk about another ship that most people don't know anything about. Talk to us about that.
everybody was looking forward to the anniversary of the Titanic, I discovered a book about another ship in my native Chicago that I hadn't heard about called the Eastland. And the Eastland was an excursion ship that capsized in Chicago Harbor at the beginning of an outing, a party for workers at a telephone factory in the suburbs. These were young workers, and they were very excited. They were overloading the ship, and actually, very sadly, there were even more passengers killed on the Eastland than there were on the Titanic. Then the question became, well, why did the Eastland capsize in this way? And as usual with tragedies, there were a number of reasons. One of them was that they were unfamiliar with the ship. They were all going from one side to another. But there was also the fact that lifeboats had been installed on the ship as a reaction to the Titanic, and the lifeboats destabilized it. The lifeboats and the weight of the additional deck.
But the interesting thing I think about that is one thinks, wow, the Titanic, such a disaster, we've got to have more lifeboats. And you never think lifeboats might trigger another incident where more people die.
There was something else really interesting about the Eastland, and that is why I had grown up in Chicago and had never heard about this great tragedy. And it has to do with the sociology of disasters. On the Titanic, there were people from many different countries, and there were rich and famous people as well as obscure immigrants. So many people actually knew somebody who knew somebody on the Titanic. The difference was, on the Eastland, that these workers came from a fairly homogeneous community. They didn't know many other people in the rest of Chicago, let alone in the rest of the country. And so it was a network that was folded in on itself. There were many funerals there. People in that part of Chicago still remember it. But it did not have the same kind of resonance because there were very few people who actually knew somebody who died there who didn't live in that part of Chicago.